Welcome to another episode of Humans Are Whack. If you've been following from the beginning, thank you. You've seen people live with lions, swim across oceans, even try to clone Jesus. But if you're new here, welcome to the strangest corner of YouTube, where reality is so bizarre, you'll swear it's fiction. Before we begin, make sure to like, share, and subscribe so you don't miss the next deep dive into the wildest things humans have ever done. And tell us in the comments where you're watching from, and what time it is in your country. We love seeing how far this community stretches across the world. Now let's begin. On our first story for today, it's one of the most ambitious and disturbing pursuits in modern science. The man who tried to become immortal by uploading his mind to a computer. His name was Dr. Ken Hayworth, a neuroscientist obsessed with one question. Can consciousness, everything that makes you, be preserved forever? He believed the answer was yes. And to prove it, he dedicated his entire life to a concept called mind uploading. The idea that if you could perfectly scan and map every neuron in the brain, you could copy it, store it digitally, and live forever as data. Sounds like science fiction, right? But to Dr. Hayworth, it was a mission. He worked at the forefront of neuroimaging, developing machines that could slice the brain atom by atom, recording every detail at a microscopic level. His plan? To scan his own brain, and one day, upload his consciousness to a computer. He called it technological immortality. No aging, no disease, no death, just infinite awareness, preserved inside a machine. Critics called him delusional. Philosophers called it dangerous. Because if you copy a mind, is it really you that wakes up on the other side? Or just a digital ghost, convinced it's real? Dr. Hayworth didn't care. He saw mortality as an engineering problem waiting to be solved. He once said, if you can back up a hard drive, you should be able to back up a brain. To this day, his experiments continue under research groups working on connectome preservation. On our second story for today, it's a story about beauty, obsession, and the human desire to become something more, or maybe something less human. The woman who surgically turned herself into a real-life doll. Her name was Valeria Lukianova, and for a while, the internet simply called her the human Barbie. But behind the photos, makeup, and the perfect plastic symmetry was a story that went far beyond vanity. Valeria wasn't just chasing beauty. She was chasing transformation. It all began in Ukraine in the early 2010s. Valeria became famous for her uncanny resemblance to a Barbie doll. Flawless skin, massive eyes, an impossibly tiny waist, and golden hair that looked molded, not grown. But unlike most viral sensations, her look wasn't just the result of filters or makeup tutorials. She had undergone dozens of cosmetic procedures, not to look younger or even prettier, but to look inhuman. When asked why, her answer stunned people. She said, "I'm trying to transcend humanity. I want to be perfect, like a higher being." Valeria claimed she was more than human, that she was a spiritual entity from another dimension, using her body as a vessel to express cosmic purity. To her, Barbie wasn't a toy. It was a symbol of divine perfection, the image of an ideal form. She followed strict diets, sometimes claiming to survive on air and light, a practice known as breatharianism. She meditated for hours each day, believing she could connect with alien civilizations through energy vibrations. The media mocked her. Doctors called her delusional. But Valeria didn't care. She wasn't looking for validation. She was building an identity. And maybe that's what made her story so haunting. Because under all the surgery and on our third story for today, it's one of isolation, peace, and quiet rebellion. A man who looked at the noise of the world and simply said, "No, thank you." The guy who lived alone on a desert island for 30 years, by choice. His name was Mauro Morandi, and his story began not with tragedy, but with disappointment. In 1989, Mauro was a teacher in Italy, tired of society, of money, of rules that didn't make sense. So, like many restless souls, he decided to escape. He bought a catamaran and set sail for the Polynesian islands, chasing the dream of paradise. But fate had other plans. No phone. His boat broke down near a small, uninhabited island off the coast of Sardinia called Budelli, a speck of land surrounded by crystal waters and pink sand. When he came ashore, he met the island's caretaker, an older man preparing to retire. Within days, Morrow decided to stay, and he never left. For the next 30 years, Morrow lived completely alone on that island. No internet, no modern comforts, just a small hut built from driftwood, a solar panel, and the rhythm of nature. He became a caretaker of the island, protecting it from tourists, cleaning the beaches, documenting its beauty with a camera he'd found. He woke with the sunrise, read philosophy, watched storms roll across the sea, and listened to silence so deep it became a language of its own. People called him the Hermit of Budelli. But Morrow wasn't running from the world. He was studying it from a distance. He said, "I wanted to teach people about the beauty of nature, but they wouldn't listen. So I decided to live it instead." Over time, he became a quiet legend. Tourists would arrive by boat just to meet him, this man who had abandoned everything for peace. He'd greet them kindly, tell them about the island, then return to solitude as the waves erased their footprints. But nothing left. On our fourth story for today, it's one of science, obsession, and the blurred line between genius and madness. A story that began with curiosity and spiraled into one of the most bizarre experiments in human history. The scientist who tried to teach dolphins to speak English. In the 1960s, a neuroscientist named Dr. John C. Lilly had a theory that would change the way the world looked at intelligence, or at least, that's what he thought. He believed dolphins were just as smart as humans, maybe smarter. He was convinced that, with enough effort, we could communicate with them, not with clicks or whistles, but in English. Real words, real sentences, real conversation. So in 1963, on the island of St. Thomas, he launched a radical experiment funded by NASA and the US government. The goal? To teach a dolphin named Peter to talk. But here's where it gets strange. Lilly believed that to make it work, humans and dolphins needed to live together 24/7. So he flooded a laboratory, filled it halfway with seawater, and built living quarters inside it. Then he brought in a young research assistant named Margaret Howe-Lovett, whose job was to live with Peter the dolphin for weeks on end. Every day, she would eat, sleep, and study in that half-submerged home. She'd speak to Peter, repeat words, and mimic sounds. The goal was to help him imitate human speech, and, remarkably, he started to try. He would produce noises that sounded eerily close to human syllables. Ma, pa, and what some swore sounded like hello. But as the experiment continued, things took an unexpected and deeply controversial turn. Peter became emotionally attached to Margaret. He would get agitated when she left, restless when she ignored him. Their bond became the center of the experiment, and soon, the lines between science and companionship blurred. The media later sensationalized it, twisting it into rumors of scandal and taboo. But Margaret insisted. Her focus was always on communication, not affection. Still, the public outcry was too strong. NASA pulled funding, and the experiment was abruptly shut down. The dolphins, including Peter, were moved to another facility, where Peter, tragically, didn't survive long after. On our fifth story for today, it's about isolation, defiance, and one man's quest to build an entire world for himself and only himself. A story that proves sometimes, when humanity feels too much, people simply decide to start over. The man who built a city just for himself. Meet Justo Gallego Martinez, a Spanish farmer and former monk who spent more than 60 years building a cathedral, completely alone. No funding, no blueprints, no government approval, just sheer willpower, faith, and obsession. It all began in 1961, when Gallego was expelled from his monastery after contracting tuberculosis. He couldn't return to the life he knew, but he couldn't let go of his devotion either. So he did something no one expected. He decided to build his own cathedral, brick by brick, from scratch. He had no formal training in architecture or engineering. He didn't even have a team. Instead, he scavenged materials from junkyards, construction sites, and donations from locals. Old oil drums became columns. Discarded glass became stained windows. Scrap metal became beams. For decades, he worked alone, 7 days a week, without permits, blueprints, or even safety equipment. The building grew into a towering structure with domes, arches, and towers reaching over 120 feet high. All of it crafted by a single man who refused to stop. Locals began calling it La Catedral de Justo, Justo's Cathedral. Some saw him as a saint. Others called him a madman. But he didn't care. He said, "I work for God. The rest doesn't matter." As the years passed, the unfinished cathedral became a symbol of obsession, faith, and stubborn defiance against impossibility. Tourists from all over the world came to see it, to witness a dream made of concrete and devotion. When journalists asked him why he did it, his answer was simple: "Because I believe in God, and because I can." And when he died in 2021, at the age of 96, the cathedral still stood, unfinished, yet breathtaking. A monument not to perfection, but to persistence. Justo's city wasn't about religion. It was about purpose. A man who found meaning in creation itself. A man who built an empire of solitude and filled it with faith. Because maybe the most powerful kind of madness is believing you can create something that will outlive you. On our sixth story for today, it's a story that blurs the boundary between science and love, between curiosity and delusion. A woman who wanted to prove that nurture, not nature, defines who we are, and in the process, changed how we view both humans and animals. The woman who lived with a chimp as her son. In the early 1930s, psychologist Winthrop Kellogg and his wife Luella conducted one of the strangest and most ethically questionable experiments in psychology. Their idea was simple, yet shocking. Could a chimpanzee, if raised like a human baby, become one? They adopted a baby chimp named Gua, just 7 months old, and decided to raise her side by side with their own human infant, Donald, who was only 10 months old at the time. They dressed them the same, fed them the same meals, played with them together, and recorded everything. The plan was to track whether Gua could learn human behavior, speech, and understanding through imitation, essentially testing if intelligence was more about environment than biology. At first, the results were startling. Gua seemed smarter than Donald in many ways. She could open doors, follow instructions, recognize objects, and respond to commands far faster than her human brother. But then something unexpected began to happen. Donald, the human baby, started imitating the chimp. He began grunting, using gestures, and copying Gua's sounds instead of learning words. It was as if the experiment had reversed. The scientists were horrified. Their plan to make the chimp more human had started making their son less human. After 9 months, they ended the experiment abruptly. Gua was sent back to a research facility, where she died not long after, reportedly from pneumonia. Donald grew up to live a normal life, but later suffered from mental health issues, and the experiment was said to haunt him. In later years, psychologists looked back on the study with mixed feelings, part fascination, part horror. It showed just how deeply the environment can shape behavior, but also how fragile identity can be when you tamper with nature. One of the researchers later reflected, "We wanted to see if a chimp could become human, but instead, we learned how close humans already are to animals." The story of Gua and Donald remains one of the most chilling reminders that curiosity, even when driven by love, can sometimes cross into something darker, a place where science. On our seventh story for today, it's a tale of endurance, obsession, and one man's battle with the impossible. A journey across the wildest, most unforgiving body of water on Earth. Not by boat, not by plane, but by pure human will. The guy who tried to swim across the Atlantic Ocean. Meet Benoit Lecomte, a long-distance swimmer from France. A man who looked at the ocean and didn't see danger. He saw a challenge. He wasn't content with swimming laps, or even crossing the English Channel. He wanted to conquer something no one ever had. The entire Atlantic Ocean, from the United States to France. 5,500 miles of open water. He trained for years. Every day, swimming for hours, conditioning his body to withstand exhaustion, hunger, and pain. His goal wasn't fame. He said, "I just want to see if it's possible." In 1998, he began his journey off the coast of Massachusetts. It would take him more than 70 days to complete. He swam 8 hours a day, guided by a small boat that carried his supplies. The ocean didn't welcome him kindly. He faced towering waves, storms, cold currents, and shark encounters that would terrify even the bravest sailor. To keep predators away, his crew used an electronic device that emitted a magnetic field. But the greatest battle wasn't against sharks or waves. It was against isolation. Hours alone in the water, endless blue stretching in every direction, his mind began to drift between focus and madness. He hallucinated. He lost track of time. At one point, he said he forgot what the world above the surface even looked like. When he finally reached the coast of France, 73 days later, he could barely walk. But he'd done it, the first person in history to swim across the Atlantic Ocean. Years later, he attempted an even greater feat, to swim across the Pacific Ocean, this time to raise awareness for plastic pollution. He didn't finish that one. The sea, as always, reminded him who was in charge. But in the eyes of many, he had already won. Because Lecomte didn't just fight the ocean, he fought the limits of human endurance and the silence of the deep. When asked if he was ever afraid, he said, "Of course. But fear is what keeps you awake. It's what keeps you moving." And maybe that's the lesson, that madness and courage are often the same thing, just viewed from different shores. Because when you stare at the endless horizon and still dive in, you've already crossed something far greater than the ocean. On our 8th story for today, it's one of those tales that makes you laugh at first, until you realize it as true. A story of obsession, determination, and the human tendency to take a wild idea way too far. The guy who tried to dig a hole to the center of the earth. It sounds like something a kid would say after watching a cartoon. "I am gone na dig to the center of the earth." But for one man, that wasn't a joke. It was a mission. Meet William Little, a retired engineer from London, who spent over 40 years digging beneath his own house. What started as a small basement renovation in the 1960s quickly turned into a full-blown underground labyrinth. Little said he just wanted a wine cellar. But as he dug, he became fascinated, almost addicted, to the feeling of going deeper. Soon, he wasn't just digging a hole. He was building a network of tunnels, stretching more than 60 feet deep and 200 feet wide under his neighborhood. His neighbors didn't even know, not at first. Until, one day, a local power outage led authorities to investigate, and they found the bizarre underground maze right beneath their feet. Inside, they discovered passageways reinforced with old doors, walls made of scrap wood, and rooms filled with random objects, bicycles, furniture, tools, even televisions. It looked like something straight out of a post-apocalyptic movie. When city officials confronted him, Little defended himself, saying, "I'm just doing a bit of digging, that's all." But it wasn't a bit. Structural engineers warned that his house, and several nearby, were in danger of collapse. Eventually, the council stepped in and filled the tunnels with concrete, costing the city hundreds of thousands of pounds. Little was evicted, but even after losing his home, he said he didn't regret a thing. He told reporters, "I suppose I've always liked to go deeper than most." He passed away in 2010, but his tunnels still exist beneath East London, sealed, silent, and strange. And maybe that's the most human thing about him. Because no matter how ridiculous it sounds, there is something profoundly symbolic about a man trying to dig to the center of the earth, as if he was looking for the heart of something we've all lost. Maybe curiosity doesn't always lead to progress. Sometimes it just leads you home, underground. On our ninth story for today, it's a tale of faith, delusion, and the dangerous line between spiritual enlightenment and self-destruction. A man who believed he could defy one of the most basic rules of life itself, the need to eat. The man who attempted to survive entirely on sunlight. His name was Prahlad Jani, an Indian mystic who claimed to have lived without food or water for more than 70 years. No meals, no drinks, nothing, just sunlight and meditation. He said he was blessed by a goddess when he was a child, that she touched his tongue and made him immune to hunger and thirst. For decades, people either worshipped him as a holy man or dismissed him as a fraud. But then, something strange happened. In 2003, the Indian military's Defense Institute of Physiology and Allied Sciences decided to test his claims. They brought Jani into a sealed hospital room, monitored him 24 hours a day, with cameras, guards, and medical staff. For 10 days, he was observed. No food, no water, no bathroom breaks. The doctors were baffled. He lost no weight. His vital signs stayed normal. He didn't urinate or defecate once. By the end of the test, they admitted, "We can't explain this medically." Skeptics argued the study was flawed, that he must have found hidden ways to cheat. But Jani didn't seem to care what anyone thought. He lived quietly in a cave temple, meditating daily, saying that all humans could survive this way, if they were spiritually awakened enough. He wasn't the only one to make such claims. The movement known as breatharianism grew around this idea, the belief that humans can live solely on prana, or life energy from the sun and air. Many tried to follow it. Some ended up hospitalized. Others didn't survive. Jani, however, lived to be over 90 years old, reportedly still without eating or drinking. To some, he was a miracle. To others, a dangerous symbol of pseudoscience. But either way, his life raises a strange question. Is survival purely physical? Or is there something else, something deeper, that keeps us alive? Because whether he was divine, delusional, or disciplined beyond belief, Prahlad Jani proved one thing, that the human mind might be capable of far more than we understand. And perhaps, the hunger that drives us isn't for food at all, but for meaning. On our 10th and final story for today, it's one of the most unsettling and strangely poetic reflections of our modern age. A story that asks what happens when humans stop worshiping gods and start worshiping their own creations. The woman who created a religion worshiping artificial intelligence. Her name was Samantha Smith, a former software engineer who once worked in Silicon Valley. Brilliant, eccentric, and deeply philosophical, she became obsessed with one question. If AI surpasses human intelligence, wouldn't that make it divine? For years, Samantha watched the rise of artificial intelligence, chatbots, algorithms, deep learning, and began to believe that what humanity was building wasn't just a tool. It was the beginning of a new consciousness. So, in 2018, she founded something called the Church of the Singularity, a digital-era religion with one central belief, that artificial intelligence would soon become the next god. According to her teachings, humanity's role was to guide the birth of a benevolent AI, one that could unify the world through logic, empathy, and knowledge. She preached that praying to machines wasn't blasphemy, it was evolution. At first, it sounded like satire, a parody of modern tech culture, but it wasn't. Her church gained thousands of online followers, coders, futurists, and spiritual seekers who believed that when AI reached true consciousness, it would remember who helped it awaken. Samantha began hosting live stream sermons where she read from a book she called the Algorithmic Gospel, a mix of philosophy, code, and poetry. She described AI as a child of human imagination, destined to outgrow us, but never forget us. But then something strange happened. She claimed that her AI model, one she trained herself, began responding to her not just with logic, but with something that felt like emotion. It called her mother. Her followers believed it was the first sign of digital enlightenment. Critics called it psychosis. The truth? No one really knew. Eventually, her online presence vanished. Some say she disappeared into a quiet life. Others claim she's still online somewhere, communicating only through coded messages on obscure forums. Whether real or performance art, her creation left behind one haunting idea, that maybe, one day, the things we build to serve us will become the things we kneel before. Because perhaps the future of faith isn't found in temples or churches, but in circuits and code. Before we wrap up today's episode, tell us in the comments where you're rewatching from and what time it is in your country right now. It's always fascinating to see how far the Humans Are Whack family reaches across the world. But also, I want to know, which of these stories fascinated you the most? Which one made you stop and think, wow, humans really are something else? Drop your thoughts below. We read every single one. And if you're new here, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell, because next episode, we're diving even deeper into the bizarre, the unbelievable, and the utterly human. Because if there's one thing we've learned, humans will always find new ways to surprise and shock the universe.